I thought I was walking into a normal Sunday dinner at my sister's house. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, candles flickered on the dining table, and everything looked picture perfect. But the moment I mentioned helping our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, with her grocery shopping, something shifted in the room. Angela's face twisted with rage, her eyes blazing with fury I'd never seen before. "You're always playing the saint," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Always making everyone else look bad with your perfect little acts of kindness." Before I could respond, her hand cracked across my face with shocking force. The sting burned my cheek as she grabbed my shoulders and shoved me hard toward the front door. "Get out of my house!" she screamed. I stumbled backward, catching myself against the door frame, my heart pounding with disbelief. But what shattered me most wasn't Angela's violence. It was watching my parents sit there at that dinner table, forks still in their hands, staring at me with cold, empty expressions as I fell into the yard. I sat in my car outside Angela's house for what felt like hours, my hands trembling as I touched the burning handprint on my cheek. Nothing made sense. Angela had always been competitive, but this level of rage seemed to come from nowhere. The more I replayed the encounter, the more I realized there had been warning signs I'd missed completely. Over the past few months, conversations would stop abruptly whenever I walked into a room. Mom would quickly hang up phone calls claiming they were just telemarketers. Dad would shuffle papers into drawers with unusual haste. Even at family gatherings, there were whispered conversations in corners that ceased the moment I approached. The pieces started falling into place as I drove home to my small apartment across town. At Grandma Rose's funeral 6 months earlier, I'd caught Angela whispering something urgent to our parents that made all three of them turn and stare at me with expressions I couldn't decode at the time. Now that look made perfect sense. It wasn't grief or concern, it was calculation. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. The caller ID showed Derek Morrison, my cousin from Mom's side of the family. Derek had always been the family truth teller, the one who couldn't keep secrets even when he probably should. "Courtney, I heard about what happened tonight," he said without preamble. His voice carried a weight that made my stomach drop. "I think there's something you need to know, and I probably should have told you months ago." "What are you talking about, Derek?" He sighed heavily. "Your sister has been organizing family meetings every Tuesday night for the past 4 months, at your parents' house. Everyone's been there except you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Family meetings about what?" "Grandma Rose's estate. Angela has been convinced that you shouldn't get your share of the inheritance. She's been telling everyone you're financially irresponsible, that you just waste the money on frivolous things. She said you're too impulsive to handle that kind of responsibility." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's ridiculous. I've been saving money since college. I work 2 jobs and live in a studio apartment specifically so I can build financial stability." "I know that, and I told them that, but Angela has been very persuasive. She's shown them examples of your social media posts about weekend trips and new clothes, twisting everything to make it look like you're reckless with money. She even brought printouts of your Instagram photos to these meetings." My mind reeled. Those weekend trips were always budget-friendly adventures within driving distance. The clothes were clearance finds I'd been proud to discover. Angela had weaponized my small moments of joy against me. "There's more," Derek continued reluctantly. "They've already contacted a lawyer, someone named Harrison Fletcher from downtown. Angela found some legal precedent about challenging inheritance distributions based on financial incompetence. They've been building a case to exclude you from Grandma Rose's will entirely." The betrayal cut deeper than Angela's slap. My own parents had been sitting in secret meetings listening to my sister systematically destroy my character, and they'd said nothing to defend me. They'd let her paint me as irresponsible and unworthy. "Tonight's dinner," Derek said quietly. "I think it was supposed to provoke you into some kind of outburst. Angela told everyone you'd probably get violent if confronted about your behavior. She said you'd prove her point about being unstable. But I didn't get violent. She hit me. Which is exactly why I'm calling you. What happened tonight doesn't match what Angela said would happen. She was so confident you'd lose your temper and attack her. Instead, she attacked you. That tells me she was desperate to create a scene no matter what." After Derek hung up, I sat in my car staring at my apartment building, feeling completely alone in the world. The family I'd trusted, the people I'd believed would always have my back, had been plotting against me for months. Worse, they'd been so thorough in their planning that tonight felt like the culmination of a carefully orchestrated campaign. I realized the violence hadn't been spontaneous at all. It had been premeditated, designed to create evidence of my supposed instability. Angela needed me to look dangerous and unpredictable. When I didn't give her that ammunition naturally, she'd manufactured it herself. The most chilling part was how prepared my parents had looked. They hadn't jumped up in shock when Angela struck me. They hadn't rushed to check if I was hurt or demanded an explanation. They'd watched with the detached interest of people observing an expected outcome. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma Rose, about how proud she'd been when I graduated college debt-free, about how she'd always praised my careful budgeting and planning. She would have been horrified to know her own family was using her legacy as a weapon against me. But more than grief, I felt a growing determination. If Angela wanted to play games with the truth, then it was time for me to start investigating what truths she might be hiding. The next morning, I called Maria Santos, the home care aide, who'd helped take care of Grandma Rose during her final 2 years. Maria had always been kind to me, and I remembered how uncomfortable she'd looked during Angela's visits toward the end. We met at a small coffee shop near the hospital where Maria worked her second job. She looked nervous, glancing around as if she expected someone to be watching us. "I've been hoping you would reach out," Maria said in her soft accent. "There were things happening with your grandmother's finances that worried me, but I didn't know who to tell." She pulled out a manila folder from her oversized purse. "I kept copies of everything because something felt wrong. Your sister Angela. She was always asking your grandmother about her bank accounts, about where she kept important papers. At first I thought she was just trying to help organize things." Maria opened the folder and spread out bank statements across our small table. "But then I started noticing these large withdrawals, always in round numbers. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. Always on days when Angela visited and always when your grandmother was having her bad days, when the medication made her confused and sleepy." I studied the documents, my heart sinking with each page. The pattern was unmistakable. Every 2 to 3 weeks, substantial amounts had been withdrawn from Grandma Rose's savings account. The withdrawals had started about 2 years ago and continued right up until 3 weeks before her death. "I asked your grandmother about these withdrawals," Maria continued, "but she never remembered making them. She would get upset and confused, saying she couldn't understand where her money was going. Angela told me your grandmother was just having memory issues and not to worry her about finances." "Did you ever see Angela with withdrawal slips or checks?" Maria nodded grimly. "Several times. She would bring paperwork for your grandmother to sign always when your grandmother was tired or had just taken her pain medication. Angela would guide her hand, showing her where to sign. She said it was for household expenses and medical bills, but the amounts were so much larger than any bills I ever saw. I felt sick. "Maria, why didn't you report this?" Her eyes filled with tears. I tried to ask questions, but Angela told me that if I caused problems or made accusations, She would call immigration and say I was stealing from your grandmother. She said she had connections who could make sure I never worked in healthcare again. I have 3 children, Courtney. I couldn't risk losing my job or being deported over suspicions I couldn't prove. We spent the next hour going through Maria's carefully preserved records. Phone bills showed numerous calls to estate attorneys and financial advisors, all made from Grandma Rose's landline during Angela's visits. Medical records revealed prescriptions that were filled but never seemed to make it to my grandmother's daily pill organizer. Your sister was very smart about timing, Maria explained. She always came when your grandmother was most vulnerable, and she always had explanations ready for any questions. She told your grandmother that you and your parents had asked her to handle the financial matters because everyone was too busy to deal with complicated paperwork. The most damning evidence was a series of check stubs in Angela's handwriting. The signatures looked like Grandma Rose's, but when I compared them to birthday cards my grandmother had written me, the differences were subtle but clear. The pressure was different, the letter formation slightly off. There's something else, Maria said reluctantly. About 2 weeks before your grandmother passed, Angela asked me to witness some paperwork. She said it was just routine healthcare documents, but looking back, I think it might have been changes to your grandmother's will or financial arrangements. Angela was very insistent that I sign as a witness, and she gave me an extra $100 that week for being so helpful with the family matters. By the time we finished going through everything, a devastating picture had emerged. Angela hadn't just been planning to exclude me from my inheritance. She'd been systematically stealing from Grandma Rose for years, using her position as the primary caregiver to manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman. The house Angela lived in, the one where she'd struck me just 24 hours earlier, had been purchased exactly 18 months ago. The timing aligned perfectly with the largest series of withdrawals from Grandma Rose's account. Maria handed me copies of everything she'd brought. I made these for you because I knew someday the truth would need to come out. Your grandmother was a good woman. She didn't deserve to be stolen from in her final years. As I drove home, my phone rang. It was Derek again. Courtney, I've been asking around about that lawyer Angela hired, Harrison Fletcher. Turns out he specializes in elder law and estate disputes. Word is he's helped other families contest wills based on claims of financial incompetence or mental instability of beneficiaries. How many other families? Enough that he's got a reputation for it. The concerning part is that in most of these cases, the family member who hired him ended up with a significantly larger portion of the estate than originally intended. I thanked Derek and hung up, my mind racing. Angela wasn't just trying to exclude me from my inheritance. She was trying to steal my portion for herself, and she'd found a lawyer who specialized in helping families do exactly that. But now I had evidence that Angela had been the one stealing from our grandmother. The question was what to do with that information and whether it was enough to stop her before she succeeded in destroying my reputation and stealing what was rightfully mine. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by Maria's documents planning my next move. Angela thought she was the only one capable of strategic thinking, the only one smart enough to plan ahead. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. 3 days after the dinner incident, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my apartment door at 7 in the morning. I was getting ready for work when he handed me an official-looking envelope with the county courthouse seal. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Angela had filed a restraining order against me along with formal assault charges. According to her sworn statement, I had violently attacked her without provocation during a family dinner, causing physical injuries and emotional trauma that required medical attention. The police report painted me as an unstable aggressor who had burst into Angela's home and assaulted her in front of our horrified parents. It included photographs of Angela with what appeared to be facial bruising, a torn blouse, and scratch marks on her arms. The images were convincing and professionally documented. But I knew exactly what I was looking at. Those bruises were makeup. I'd seen Angela create similar effects for Halloween costumes and community theater productions. She'd always been talented with cosmetics, able to create realistic injuries for her drama club performances in high school. The restraining order was even more devastating than the criminal charges. It prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of Angela, her home, her workplace, or any location where she might reasonably be expected to appear. That included my parents' house family gatherings and even Grandma Rose's gravesite. By 10 in the morning, I was sitting in the office of Janet Walsh, a criminal defense attorney I'd found through online reviews. Janet was in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "I've seen cases like this before," Janet said after reviewing the documents. "Your sister has been very thorough in building her case. Look at this witness statement." She pointed to a sworn affidavit from someone named Margaret Patterson. According to Mrs. Patterson, she had been gardening in her yard next to Angela's property when she heard shouting through an open window. She claimed to have seen me grab Angela by the shoulders and shake her violently before striking her repeatedly about the face and neck. "The problem," Janet continued, "is that Mrs. Patterson's account corroborates the physical evidence and the medical report. Angela was treated at Mercy General Hospital emergency room for facial contusions, neck strain, and defensive wounds on her arms." I stared at the hospital report in disbelief. "She went to the hospital 3 hours after the alleged incident. The medical examiner noted injuries consistent with physical assault. The photographs were taken by a trained forensic photographer." Janet spread out more documents. "It gets worse. Your parents have also provided statements supporting Angela's version of events. Your mother, Patricia Morrison, states that you arrived at dinner agitated and hostile, and that you have a long history of jealousy and resentment toward Angela. Your father, Robert Morrison, confirms that you flew into a rage when confronted about your behavior, and that he had to physically restrain you to prevent further violence." The betrayal was complete. My own parents had signed legal documents portraying me as violent and unstable. They'd provided character testimony that painted me as jealous, aggressive, and dangerous. "There's more strategic timing here," Janet observed. "The estate probate hearing for your grandmother's will is scheduled for next month. If you're convicted of assault, especially assault against a family member, it provides grounds for excluding you from inheritance based on moral unfitness. Some states have laws preventing convicted criminals from benefiting from family estates." I felt the walls closing in around me. What happens if I'm found guilty? Best case scenario, you're looking at anger management classes, community service, and a permanent restraining order. Worst case, you could face jail time for domestic violence, and you would automatically forfeit any claim to your grandmother's estate. Angela would receive your portion by default. Janet leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Here's what concerns me most about this case. The level of planning and coordination suggests this wasn't a spontaneous reaction to a dinner argument. Your sister had medical photographs taken, witness statements gathered, and legal paperwork filed within 72 hours of the alleged incident. That's remarkably fast for someone who was supposedly traumatized by an unexpected assault." She was right. Angela had moved with military precision, executing a plan that seemed far too elaborate to have been conceived after the fact. "There's something else," Janet added. "I did some research on Harrison Fletcher, the attorney representing Angela in the estate matter. He's worked on several cases where family members used criminal charges to challenge inheritance distributions. In every case, the person who filed the criminal complaint ended up with a significantly larger share of the estate." Are you saying this is a pattern? I'm saying your sister may have found a lawyer who specializes in helping families weaponize the legal system against their relatives. Fletcher has a reputation for being very creative in finding ways to disqualify heirs. Janet gathered the documents into a neat pile. Here's the reality, Courtney. Even if we can prove your innocence in criminal court, the damage to your character could be permanent. The mere fact that charges were filed gives your sister ammunition for the estate dispute. She can argue that you're the type of person who inspires criminal complaints, regardless of whether you're ultimately convicted. I left Janet's office feeling like I was trapped in a maze with no exit. Angela had anticipated every move planned for every contingency. She'd created a legal web so complex that even proving my innocence might not be enough to escape it. That afternoon, I received a call from my office. My supervisor, Tom Bradley, sounded uncomfortable as he explained that due to the pending criminal charges, I would need to take unpaid leave until the matter was resolved. Our company policy prohibited employees with pending violence charges from working with vulnerable populations, and my job involved visiting elderly clients in their homes. Angela's trap was perfect. She'd stripped away my family, my reputation, my financial stability, and my ability to support myself during the legal battle. Every aspect of my life had been systematically dismantled, while I'd been completely unaware of her strategy. But as I sat in my apartment that evening, surrounded by legal documents and Maria's evidence about the financial theft, I realized Angela had made one crucial mistake. She'd been so focused on destroying my reputation that she'd neglected to cover her own tracks completely. The same methodical planning that made her assault case so convincing might also be the key to exposing her fraud. If Angela was capable of this level of legal manipulation, what other schemes had she orchestrated? And more importantly, was she confident enough in her success to have left evidence of her other crimes unguarded? I had 1 week before my first court appearance. It was time to turn Angela's own tactics against her and show her that two people could play the game of strategic planning. I used the money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house to hire Rachel Stone, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Rachel was a former forensic accountant with the state attorney's office, and she had a reputation for uncovering complex fraud schemes. Your sister's pattern of behavior suggests someone who's been getting away with financial manipulation for a long time, Rachel told me during our first meeting. People who are this bold and systematic usually have multiple schemes running simultaneously. Rachel's investigation started with Angela's financial records, but what she uncovered went far beyond simple theft. Within 4 days, she'd discovered an elaborate web of fraud that had been operating for nearly 2 years. Your sister has been filing insurance claims using your grandmother's identity even after her death, Rachel explained, spreading documents across her office table. Look at these medical reimbursement forms. Angela submitted claims for physical therapy sessions, medical equipment rentals, and prescription drugs that were supposedly prescribed for your grandmother between March and July of this year. I stared at the paperwork. But Grandma Rose died in February. Exactly. Angela has been collecting insurance payouts for medical services provided to a deceased person. She's forged doctor signatures, created fake medical necessity forms, and even submitted fraudulent prescriptions to multiple pharmacies. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Angela had collected over $80,000 in false insurance claims using a combination of Medicare fraud, private insurance scams, and prescription drug schemes. Here's where it gets really interesting, Rachel continued. Your sister has been selling your grandmother's unused medications to elderly neighbors at marked up prices. I found evidence that she's been collecting prescriptions for powerful pain medications and anxiety drugs that your grandmother never actually took, then reselling them for cash. Rachel showed me pharmacy records documenting dozens of prescriptions filled in Grandma Rose's name, including medications that weren't on her actual treatment plan. The dates showed that Angela had continued picking up these prescriptions for months after our grandmother's death. I also found security footage from Preston Pharmacy on Elm Street. Angela has been using your grandmother's Medicare card and photo identification to pick up prescriptions as recently as last week. The pharmacist thought she was your grandmother's designated caregiver, so no one questioned the arrangement. But the most damning evidence was what Rachel had discovered about Mrs. Margaret Patterson, the neighbor who'd provided the false witness statement about my alleged assault on Angela. Margaret Patterson isn't just a random neighbor, Rachel revealed. She's been Angela's business partner in the prescription drug reselling scheme. I have phone records showing over 200 calls between them in the past 8 months. I also have evidence that Mrs. Patterson has been helping Angela forge medical documents and insurance forms. Rachel played an audio recording from a hidden camera she'd installed near Angela's mailbox. The recording captured Angela and Mrs. Patterson discussing their witness coordination for my assault case. "You remember what we practiced?" Angela's voice was clear on the recording. "You saw Courtney grab me first. You saw her hit me repeatedly. You were scared for my safety. Make sure you mention that you were scared for my safety." Mrs. Patterson's voice responded, "What if they ask why I didn't call the police immediately? Tell them you were in shock. Tell them you've never seen violence like that in our neighborhood. And remember, if anyone asks about the prescriptions, we've never had any conversations about Grandma Rose's medications." The recording was time-stamped 3 days before Mrs. Patterson gave her statement to police. It proved that the assault case was entirely fabricated with coached witnesses and premeditated false testimony. "There's more," Rachel said. "I found evidence that Angela has been accessing your grandmother's credit accounts and Social Security benefits even after her death. She's opened 3 new credit cards using your grandmother's information and has been collecting Social Security payments that should have stopped in February." The financial trail showed that Angela had used the stolen funds to make the down payment on her house purchase, a new car, and fund an investment account that she'd hidden from her husband. The total amount of fraud exceeded $200,000. "Your sister has been running a systematic operation," Rachel concluded. "She's not just someone who made some bad financial decisions. She's a career criminal who's been using your family as cover for an extensive fraud network." But Rachel's most shocking discovery came when she traced Angela's communications with Harrison Fletcher, the estate attorney. "Your sister has been planning to frame you for assault for over 3 months, Rachel revealed. "I found emails between Angela and Fletcher discussing the legal strategy of using criminal charges to disqualify you from inheritance. Fletcher actually suggested that Angela document any conflicts with you, and he provided guidance on what type of evidence would be most effective in court. The emails showed that Angela had been deliberately provoking family conflicts and documenting my reactions, building a case file of supposed evidence of my instability. The dinner assault wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of a months-long plan to create legal grounds for excluding me from Grandma Rose's estate. Fletcher isn't just representing your sister in the estate matter," Rachel explained. "He's been actively helping her plan criminal fraud. In one email, he discusses the timing of assault charges to coincide with estate probate hearings. In another, he provides advice on how to make insurance fraud less detectable by spreading claims across multiple providers." I sat in Rachel's office, overwhelmed by the scope of my sister's crimes. She hadn't just betrayed our family. She'd built an entire criminal enterprise using our grandmother's identity and our family's trust. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we go to the federal authorities," Rachel said. "Insurance fraud across state lines is a federal crime. Identity theft using deceased persons' information is a federal crime. Mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud are all federal crimes. Your sister is looking at serious prison time. But Rachel had saved the most important revelation for last. I also found evidence that Angela has been drugging your parents, she said quietly. Prescription records show that she's been forging prescriptions for anxiety medications using your father's doctor's information. Security cameras at your parents' house show Angela adding substances to their coffee during her daily visits. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. My parents' strange behavior during the dinner assault, their willingness to sign false statements, their apparent detachment from reality. It wasn't complicity. It was chemical manipulation. Angela hadn't just been stealing money and planning legal attacks. She'd been systematically drugging our parents to make them more compliant with her schemes. The zombie-like behavior I'd witnessed wasn't betrayal. It was the result of months of unauthorized medication. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. Angela's web of crimes was so extensive and so well documented that she couldn't possibly escape prosecution. And once the truth came out, my parents would understand that they'd been victims too. But I also realized that Angela wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. She'd invested too much time and effort in her schemes to simply surrender when confronted with evidence. If she discovered that I was building a case against her, she might try to flee or destroy evidence. Rachel and I agreed that our next step had to be carefully coordinated with federal law enforcement to ensure that Angela couldn't escape justice or continue harming our family. The trap Angela had built for me was about to become a trap for her instead. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. My mother's voice was slurred and confused, barely recognizable through the phone. "Courtney, honey, I'm scared. I don't remember signing papers yesterday, but Robert found documents in the kitchen with my signature on them. Legal papers about Grandma Rose's house. Why can't I remember signing legal papers?" I was instantly awake. "Mom, where are you right now?" "I'm in my bathroom with the door locked. I don't want Angela to hear me talking to you. She's been staying here every night this week saying she's worried about our safety because of what you did. But Courtney, I can't remember what you did. My mind feels so foggy all the time now." This was the opening I'd been waiting for. "Mom, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I think Angela has been putting something in your food or drinks. Have you been feeling unusually tired or confused lately?" There was a long pause. "Every morning after Angela brings me coffee, I feel drowsy for hours. She says it's just because I'm getting older, but it never used to be like this. And Robert has been having memory problems too. Yesterday, he couldn't remember having a conversation with Angela about selling the house." I grabbed my jacket and keys. "Mom, don't eat or drink anything else tonight. I'm coming over and I'm bringing someone who can help us figure out what's been happening to you and Dad. But the restraining order? The restraining order is based on lies, and I'm going to prove that tonight." I called Rachel Stone and explained the situation. She met me with a mobile drug testing kit and a digital recorder. We arrived at my parents' house at 3 a.m. to find Mom waiting by the back door, looking more alert than I'd seen her in months. "Angela left about an hour ago," Mom said quietly. "She said she had an early morning appointment, but she took an overnight bag. Said she might not be back until tomorrow evening." Rachel immediately began testing samples from the coffee pot, orange juice container, and water pitcher in my parents' refrigerator. Within minutes, her test strips showed positive results for benzodiazepines in multiple beverages. "Mrs. Morrison, your daughter, has been systematically drugging you and your husband with anxiety medication," Rachel explained. "The levels I'm detecting explain the memory loss, confusion, and compliance you've been experiencing." Dad emerged from their bedroom moving slowly but looking more coherent than he had in months. "I heard voices. Courtney, what are you doing here?" I explained everything while Rachel continued collecting evidence. I showed them Maria's documentation of Angela's financial theft, Rachel's evidence of the insurance fraud, and the recordings of Angela coaching Mrs. Patterson's false testimony. "But why would she drug us?" Mom asked, tears streaming down her face. "Because she needed you to be compliant," I explained. "She needed you to sign legal documents without questioning them. She needed you to believe her stories about me being unstable. She needed you to cooperate with her plans without thinking clearly enough to see through them." Dad sank into his kitchen chair looking devastated. I signed papers giving Angela power of attorney over some of Grandma Rose's accounts. I remember feeling like I was in a fog, like I couldn't think straight, but Angela said it was just routine paperwork to help settle the estate. Rachel documented everything, photographing the contaminated beverages, recording my parents' statements about their symptoms, and gathering evidence of the forged prescriptions Angela had used to obtain the drugs. "We need to get both of you to a hospital for blood tests," Rachel said. "The levels of medication in your systems could be dangerous, and we need medical documentation of what's been done to you." At the emergency room, blood tests confirmed that both of my parents had been ingesting significant amounts of lorazepam and alprazolam for an extended period. The emergency room physician explained that the drug levels suggested regular unauthorized dosing over several months. "These medications can cause serious cognitive impairment, especially in elderly patients," Dr. Sarah Chen explained. "Memory loss, confusion, poor judgment, and increased suggestibility are all common side effects. At these dosage levels, your parents would have been functioning in a compromised mental state for months." The medical records provided crucial evidence that my parents had been victims, not willing participants in Angela's schemes. Their apparent betrayal of me had been the result of chemical manipulation, not conscious choice. While we were at the hospital, Rachel received a call from her monitoring equipment at Angela's house. Angela had returned home and was frantically moving through her house, apparently packing belongings and destroying documents. "She knows something is wrong," Rachel told me. "My surveillance shows her shredding papers and loading boxes into her car. She's either planning to run or planning to destroy evidence." But Rachel had anticipated this possibility. Working with federal investigators, she'd already secured warrants to freeze Angela's bank accounts and monitor her communications. If Angela tried to flee, law enforcement would be ready. The next morning, my parents were discharged from the hospital with a clear understanding of how they'd been manipulated and abused. For the first time in months, their minds were clear and focused. "Courtney, we owe you such an enormous apology," Mom said, gripping my hands tightly. "We let Angela convince us that you were the problem when she was the one destroying our family." Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were sharp and angry. "She used our love for her against us. She made us accomplices in her crimes by keeping us too drugged to think clearly." That afternoon, federal agents arrested Mrs. Patterson at her home. Faced with evidence of her participation in insurance fraud and perjury, she immediately agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. Mrs. Patterson's confession filled in the final pieces of Angela's operation. She revealed that Angela had recruited several elderly neighbors into the prescription drug reselling scheme, using their Medicare information to obtain medications that were then sold on the black market. "Angela told us we were just helping with neighborhood health care needs," Mrs. Patterson told investigators. "She said some elderly people couldn't afford their medications, so we were providing a community service by sharing prescriptions. I didn't realize it was illegal until she asked me to lie about witnessing an assault." But the most damaging part of Mrs. Patterson's confession was her admission that Angela had been planning to flee the country if her legal schemes failed. "She showed me a fake passport with her picture, but a different name," Mrs. Patterson revealed. "She said she had money hidden in foreign banks that her husband didn't know about. She was going to disappear if the assault charges against her sister didn't work. Federal investigators now had evidence of Angela's complete criminal operation, elder abuse insurance fraud, identity theft, money laundering, perjury, conspiracy, and planning to flee prosecution. They also had medical evidence that she'd been systematically drugging our parents to facilitate her crimes. The trap was ready to close. Angela thought she was still in control, still manipulating the system to her advantage. She had no idea that her victims had escaped her chemical control and were now working with federal law enforcement to bring her to justice. All that remained was catching her in the act of trying to access her hidden assets or flee the country. And based on Rachel's surveillance, that moment was coming very soon. Federal agent Michael Torres contacted me on a Friday morning with news that made my heart race. "We've been monitoring your sister's communications, and she's planning to empty her hidden accounts and leave the country this weekend. We need your help to make sure she doesn't escape prosecution." I met Agent Torres and his team at the federal building downtown. The operation they'd planned was more elaborate than anything I could have imagined. "Your sister has been smarter than most criminals we deal with," Agent Torres explained. "She's established multiple fake identities, hidden money in offshore accounts, and created escape routes that would be difficult to track. But she's made one critical mistake. She thinks she still controls the situation." The FBI had been watching Angela for 2 weeks, ever since Rachel had provided them with evidence of the fraud schemes. They'd discovered that Angela's criminal activities extended far beyond my family. "She's been running similar operations in 3 other families over the past 5 years, Agent Torres revealed. Always targeting elderly relatives, always using the same pattern of financial manipulation and family division. We estimate she's stolen over $700,000 total from various victims. But Angela's current plan was her most audacious yet. She intended to liquidate all her hidden assets, flee to Mexico under a false identity, and disappear permanently before anyone could stop her. She's booked a flight to Cancun under the name Jennifer Walsh for Monday morning," Agent Torres continued. "She thinks she has enough time to gather her money and escape while you're still dealing with the criminal charges she filed against you." The irony was perfect. Angela's confidence in her legal trap had made her careless about covering her own escape plans. She'd been so focused on destroying my life that she'd neglected to notice federal investigators closing in on her operations. "Here's where we need your help," Agent Torres said. "Angela is suspicious of everyone right now except family members. We need someone she trusts to make contact with her, someone who can keep her from becoming paranoid and changing her plans. But I have a restraining order. I can't legally contact her. We're working with the district attorney to temporarily suspend the restraining order for this operation. You'll be wearing a recording device, and we'll have agents positioned nearby for your safety. But we need Angela to believe she's still in control long enough for her to access the money she's planning to steal." The plan was sophisticated. I would contact Angela and tell her I wanted to apologize and try to repair our relationship. I would suggest meeting at the bank where she kept her primary accounts, claiming I needed to sign paperwork related to Grandma Rose's estate. "She'll want to meet at the bank anyway," Agent Torres explained. "Our financial surveillance shows she's planning to empty several accounts on Monday morning before her flight. If you're there, she'll feel confident that she can manipulate the situation to her advantage one last time." Over the weekend, I worked with federal agents to prepare for the confrontation. They coached me on what to say, how to behave, and what evidence they needed me to obtain during our recorded conversation. "The most important thing is getting her to admit to the financial fraud," Agent Torres emphasized. "We have documentary evidence, but a recorded confession would make prosecution much easier. Try to get her talking about the insurance claims, the prescription drug sales, and especially the identity theft using your grandmother's information." Sunday evening, I called Angela from a number the FBI had provided, one that couldn't be traced back to law enforcement. Courtney. Angela's voice sounded surprised but pleased. I thought you weren't allowed to contact me. I'm not, but I needed to talk to you. This whole situation has gotten so out of control, and I think we need to try to work things out before it destroys our entire family. There was a pause. I'm listening. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner last week. Maybe you're right that I've been irresponsible with money. Maybe I don't deserve the same inheritance as you do. But I don't want our parents to suffer because we can't get along. I could hear the satisfaction in Angela's voice. I'm glad you're finally being realistic about this situation. Could we meet tomorrow morning? I have some papers from Grandma Rose's estate that I think you should see before the probate hearing. Maybe we can figure out a solution that works for everyone. Where do you want to meet? How about First National Bank downtown? I have some estate documents in my safety deposit box that might help us understand Grandma's final wishes better. Maybe if we look at them together, we can find a fair solution. Angela agreed immediately. She suggested meeting at 10 in the morning, which was exactly when the FBI expected her to begin emptying her accounts. This is perfect, Agent Torres told me after listening to the call. She's planning to be at that bank anyway. Now she thinks she's manipulating you into helping her complete her final theft. That night I couldn't sleep. In less than 12 hours, I would be face to face with my sister, knowing that she was a career criminal who had systematically destroyed our family for money. But I would also be helping to ensure that she faced justice for what she'd done. The most satisfying part was knowing that Angela thought she was still in control. She believed her legal and chemical manipulation had worked perfectly, that I was defeated and desperate to make peace. She had no idea that our parents were now thinking clearly for the first time in months, that federal investigators had documented all of her crimes, and that her carefully planned escape was about to become the final evidence needed to convict her. Monday morning would be the end of Angela's criminal career and the beginning of justice for everyone she'd hurt. But more than that, it would be the moment when our family could finally start healing from the damage she'd inflicted through her lies, theft, and betrayal. I spent the night reviewing everything that had led to this moment, from that shocking dinner assault to the discovery of Angela's extensive fraud network. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out, and Angela would learn that her victims were much stronger and smarter than she'd ever imagined. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I wore the recording device Agent Torres had provided, a tiny microphone hidden in my jacket button that would capture every word of my conversation with Angela. FBI agents were positioned throughout the bank disguised as customers and employees, ready to make arrests the moment Angela attempted to access her fraudulent accounts. Angela was waiting in the lobby when I arrived at First National Bank at exactly 10 o'clock. She looked confident and relaxed, wearing an expensive suit I now realized had probably been purchased with stolen money from our grandmother. I'm so glad you decided to be reasonable about this situation, Angela said, giving me a hug that made my skin crawl. I think we can work out an arrangement that benefits everyone. We sat in a quiet corner of the lobby, surrounded by federal agents pretending to be bank customers. Angela had no idea she was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. Before we look at those estate documents, I said, I need to understand something. How did you know I wasn't responsible enough to handle my inheritance? What made you so certain that Grandma Rose would have wanted you to have a larger share? Angela's eyes lit up with the opportunity to explain her superior planning. Courtney, I've been managing Grandma's finances for over 2 years. I saw how confused and helpless she was becoming. Someone had to protect her money from being wasted on frivolous things. You mean the withdrawals from her savings account? Those were to protect her money. Exactly. I moved her funds to safer investments accounts that would generate better returns for the family. Grandma Rose was so grateful when I explained how I was protecting her legacy. I kept my voice neutral, encouraging her to continue. That must have been a lot of responsibility handling all those financial decisions. It was, but someone had to do it. I had to coordinate with insurance companies, manage her medical expenses, even handle her prescription needs when she became too confused to remember her medications. I was taking care of everything while you were off living your carefree life. Angela's confession was even more detailed than the FBI had hoped for. She was admitting to financial management, insurance coordination, and prescription handling, all the activities that constituted her fraud operation. The insurance claims must have been complicated, I prompted. They were incredibly complex. I had to submit documentation for all of Grandma's medical needs, physical therapy equipment, rentals, prescription medications. Some of those insurance companies tried to deny legitimate claims, so I had to be very persistent in making sure Grandma received all the benefits she was entitled to. She was admitting to the fraudulent insurance claims without realizing it. In her mind, she was describing responsible caregiving rather than criminal fraud. What about after Grandma passed away that must have made things even more complicated? Angela hesitated for just a moment. Well, there were some ongoing matters that had to be resolved. Insurance companies sometimes take months to process claims, so there were still reimbursements coming in for treatments Grandma had received before her death. It was a partial lie, but close enough to an admission of post-death fraud to be useful in court. And the medications, I remember seeing prescription bottles at her house after the funeral. Oh, those were just leftover supplies. I made sure they didn't go to waste. Some of the neighbors were struggling with prescription costs, so I helped them get access to medications they couldn't afford. It was like a community service. There it was. Angela had just admitted to illegally distributing prescription drugs while trying to make it sound like charity work. Angela, there's something I need to tell you, I said, looking directly into her eyes. I know about the forged prescriptions. I know about the fake insurance claims. I know about the identity theft using Grandma's social security number after her death. And I know about you drugging Mom and Dad. Her face went completely white. For a moment, she looked like she might deny everything, but then her expression shifted to cold calculation. You can't prove any of that, she said quietly. And even if you could, who's going to believe you? You're facing criminal assault charges. You've been declared mentally unstable by your own family. No one will take the word of someone with your reputation over mine. Actually, they will, I replied. Because the FBI has been investigating you for weeks. They have documented evidence of every crime you've committed. They have recordings of you coaching Mrs. Patterson to lie in her witness statement. They have medical proof that you've been drugging our parents. And they have financial records showing exactly how much money you've stolen. Angela's confidence finally cracked. That's impossible. I was careful about everything. I covered all my tracks. Not quite all of them. Maria Santos kept copies of every suspicious document she saw while caring for Grandma Rose. Rachel Stone traced your financial crimes across multiple states. And your fake passport under the name Jennifer Walsh has been flagged by customs officials. Angela stood up abruptly, looking around the bank lobby as if suddenly realizing she might be in danger. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm leaving. Actually, you're not, said Agent Torres, appearing beside our table with his badge clearly visible. Angela Morrison, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering. As federal agents moved in from all directions, Angela finally understood that her carefully planned criminal operation had collapsed completely. Mrs. Patterson had already been arrested and was cooperating with prosecutors. The bank accounts she'd planned to empty were frozen. Her escape route to Mexico was blocked. But the most devastating blow came when Agent Torres informed her that our parents were fully aware of how she'd been manipulating them through unauthorized medication. Your parents are prepared to testify about the systematic drugging you subjected them to, Agent Torres explained as he placed handcuffs on Angela's wrists. They've provided detailed statements about the memory loss confusion and compromised decision-making they experienced while under the influence of drugs you administered without their knowledge or consent. Angela was led away in handcuffs, her criminal empire finally exposed and dismantled. The assault charges against me were dropped immediately, and the restraining order was dissolved. Within hours, Harrison Fletcher was also arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud and for helping plan criminal schemes against inheritance beneficiaries. 3 months later, Angela pled guilty to multiple federal charges and received a 7-year prison sentence. She was ordered to pay full restitution to all her victims, including the $78,000 stolen from Grandma Rose's accounts, plus penalties and interest. Mrs. Patterson received probation in exchange for her cooperation, but lost her house to asset forfeiture. Harrison Fletcher was disbarred and received his own federal sentence for conspiracy. The estate settlement was finalized with me receiving not only my original inheritance, but additional compensation for the emotional trauma and legal expenses caused by Angela's fraud. More importantly, the truth about Grandma Rose's final years had been revealed, and her legacy was protected from further theft. My parents entered therapy to recover from the psychological effects of being systematically drugged and manipulated. It took time, but they gradually healed from the trauma of realizing how completely they'd been deceived by their own daughter. "We failed you when you needed us most," Mom said during one of our first real conversations after her recovery. "We let Angela turn us against you when we should have been protecting you from her." "You were victims too," I reminded her. "She was chemically controlling your ability to think clearly. You can't be held responsible for decisions you made while being drugged without your knowledge." 6 months after Angela's arrest, I used part of my inheritance settlement to establish the Rose Morrison Foundation named after our grandmother. The foundation helps families dealing with elder abuse and provides legal assistance to victims of inheritance fraud. On the first anniversary of that terrible dinner assault, I hosted a family gathering at my new home, purchased with my rightful inheritance. My parents were there, clear-minded and grateful for the chance to rebuild our relationship. Derek was there with his family, proud of his role in helping expose the truth. We said a prayer for Grandma Rose, acknowledging how proud she would have been to know that her legacy had ultimately been protected and that her death had not been in vain. "I learned something important through all of this," I told my family that evening. "Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who need our truth the most. And protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's the first step toward protecting everyone you love." The experience taught me that justice isn't always swift, but it can be thorough when good people work together to expose wrongdoing. Angela's crimes had been elaborate and carefully planned, but truth and persistence ultimately proved stronger than lies and manipulation. Most importantly, I learned that family bonds can survive even the most devastating betrayals when they're rebuilt on honesty, accountability, and genuine love, rather than fear and control. Our family was finally free to heal, to grow, and to honor Grandma Rose's memory the way she would have wanted. And Angela, despite all her planning and scheming, had ultimately achieved the opposite of what she'd intended. Instead of dividing us permanently, her crimes had brought us closer together and made us more committed to protecting each other from future harm. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself and fight back against people who seem to hold all the power? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is let others know they're not alone in facing family betrayal and manipulation. If this story resonated with you and helped you feel less alone in your own struggles, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories of people who found the courage to fight for justice when their own families turned against them. And please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to overcome even the most elaborate schemes designed to destroy your reputation and steal your future. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes survivors deserve to be heard, believed, and supported. I hope that sharing what I learned helps you find your own strength when facing impossible situations, and I wish you the courage to always stand up for truth, even when it's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do.